Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I found a job on the dark web. I worked in prison for aliens. I've always been a bit of a thrill seeker, not in the extreme sports way, but more in the let's see what's on the dark web tonight kind of way. I know it sounds dumb and reckless, but it's always been fascinating to me. The forbidden fruit, the dark side of the internet. Most of the time, it's just boring stuff. Dodgy marketplaces, fake IDs, and the occasional hitman ad that's probably just a scam. One night, after a few beers and with nothing better to do, I started browsing. That's when I found it. A job listing. Normally, I'd skip right past those, but this one caught my eye. The title was simple. Caretaker needed, unique opportunities. Intrigued, I clicked on it. The job description was vague but intriguing. Looking for someone adventurous. Must be discreet and reliable. High pay. Limited human interaction. Experience with animals preferred but not required. The pay listed was insane. Something like $10,000 a week. It was too good to be true, but the thought of making that much money in such a short time span was irresistible. The application process was surprisingly simple. Just a few questions about my background and willingness to keep secrets. I filled it out, sent it off, and forgot about it. A week later, I got a response. It was an address and a time. Midnight, the following Friday. I showed up at the address, a run-down warehouse on the outskirts of the town. It looked abandoned, but the lights were on. I knocked on the door, and a man in a black suit answered. He didn't say a word, just motioned for me to follow him. He led me through a maze of corridors until we reached a heavy steel door. "This is where you'll be working," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. "Once you go inside, there's no turning back. Do you understand?" I nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. He opened the door, and I stepped inside. The room was dark, with only a few flickering fluorescent lights. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, my heart nearly stopped. There were cages, dozens of them, lining the walls, and inside those cages were things, creatures, not animals, not humans, but something in between. Their eyes glowed in the dim light, and they made low, guttural sounds that sent shivers down my spine. The man handed me a clipboard with a list of tasks: feeding, cleaning, and administering medication. "Do not interact with the subjects beyond what is necessary," he warned. "And whatever you do, do not let them out of their cages." I spent the first few hours in a state of shock, trying to process what I was seeing. The creatures were unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Some had multiple limbs, others had eyes that seemed to follow me no matter where I moved. One of them, in the far corner, had a face that almost looked human, but its eyes were all wrong. Too big, too black, too empty. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by the creatures, but by something else, something unseen. Every so often, I'd hear whispers, faint and unintelligible, as if the walls themselves were talking. The first night was a blur of fear and confusion. I barely slept when I got home, my mind racing with questions. What were those things? Where did they come from? And what had I gotten myself into? The next night, I returned, and it was more of the same. Feeding, cleaning, avoiding eye contact with the creatures. But something was different this time. One of the cages was empty. I panicked, thinking one of them had escaped. but the man in the suit appeared out of nowhere and assured me everything was under control. Sometimes they need to be relocated, he explained. You just focus on your tasks. The following nights, more cages were empty. The creatures that remained seemed agitated, their growls and snarls growing louder. I started to notice things, strange things, scratches on the walls that weren't there before, objects moving when I wasn't looking, and the whispers were getting louder, more insistent. One night, I was cleaning a particularly filthy cage when I felt a sharp pain in my arm. I looked down to see one of the creatures had grabbed me through the bars, its claws digging into my flesh. I yanked my arm away, blood pouring from the wound. The creature stared at me, its eyes full of something I couldn't quite place. Anger, fear, maybe both. I rushed to the back room to bandage my arm, cursing myself for not being more careful. When I returned, the creature was gone. Its cage was empty, the door hanging open. I freaked out, searching the warehouse, but there was no sign of it. The man in the suit appeared again, as if from thin air. He didn't seem surprised or concerned. These things happen, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. Just focus on your tasks. That was the breaking point for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I told him I was done, that I couldn't do this job any longer. You can leave, he said, but you'll never be free. I didn't understand what he meant, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I ran from that warehouse and never looked back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. The next morning, there was a package on my doorstep. No return address, no note. Inside was a stack of cash. $50,000. Payment for my services, I assumed. But there was something else in the package. A small vial filled with a thick black liquid and a note that simply said, "Drink." I threw it away, but the nightmares haven't stopped. The whispers are getting louder. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear I see those eyes staring back at me. I don't know what they did to me, but I'm scared. Scared that I'll end up like those creatures. Scared that I'll never be free. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that followed me after I quit that job. Every corner I turned, every shadow I saw, felt like it was watching me, judging me. The nightmares became more vivid, more intense. The creatures from the cages haunted my sleep. Their twisted faces and glowing eyes burned into my mind. But it was the whispers that scared me the most. They weren't just in my dreams anymore. They were in my house, my head, constantly reminding me of what I'd seen. I tried to go back to my normal life, but things weren't the same. The money from the package was still untouched, sitting in a drawer. Every time I thought about using it, a chill ran down my spine. What if it was cursed? What if spending it meant I was further bound to whatever sick game I'd been a part of? Then strange things started happening. Little things at first. Lights flickering, doors creaking open on their own. I thought it was just my imagination, but it felt too real. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching at my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned my head and saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the creatures was outside, its eyes glowing in the dark, staring directly at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It just stood there, watching me. After what felt like an eternity, it finally disappeared into the night. I lay there trembling, unable to sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I found deep claw marks on the outside of my window frame. It wasn't a dream. It was real. I had to do something, but I didn't know what. Going to the police was out of the question. They'd think I was crazy. I was alone in this nightmare. A few days later, I received a phone call. The number was unknown, and when I answered, a familiar voice sent a shiver down my spine. "Why did you leave?" the man in the suit asked. His voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. "I couldn't do it anymore," I stammered. "Those things, they're not natural." "They are part of a greater purpose," he replied. "You were chosen for a reason." "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "To come back," he said. "Your job isn't finished." "I'm not coming back," I said firmly. "I can't." "Then you must face the consequences," he said, and the line went dead. I felt a wave of panic wash over me. What did he mean by consequences? That night, I locked all my doors and windows, hoping to keep whatever was out there at bay. But it didn't help. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I could almost make out words, phrases, but they were just out of reach, like a language I didn't understand. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was coming from inside the house. My blood ran cold as I realized it was coming from the basement. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly made my way down the stairs, each step echoing in the silent house. The basement was pitch black, and the air was thick with the smell of dampness and something else, something metallic. I shone the flashlight around, looking for the source of the sound. That's when I saw it, a pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the far corner. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The creature was there, in my basement, its body contorted and twisted in ways that defied logic. It moved towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I backed up against the wall, my heart racing. I knew I couldn't run. There was no escape. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. It didn't answer, just kept moving closer. In a panic, I swung the flashlight at it, hitting it square in the face. It let out a horrific screech, a sound that pierced my ears and made my skin crawl. I took the chance to run back up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me and locking it. I could hear it scratching at the door, but after a while, it stopped. I stayed up the rest of the night, clutching a kitchen knife and listening for any sign of movement. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I went back to the warehouse, determined to get answers. But when I got there, it was empty. The cages, the creatures, everything was gone. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years. In the middle of the room, there was a single piece of paper. It had my name on it. With trembling hands, I picked it up and read the message. "You can't run from your destiny." I left the warehouse, feeling more lost and terrified than ever. Whatever was happening to me, it wasn't over. The man in the suit, the creatures, the whispers, they were all part of something bigger, something I couldn't escape. The following nights were a blur of fear and sleeplessness. The creatures didn't return, but the whispers did. They grew louder, more coherent. I could hear them clearly now. "Join us. Embrace your fate." I knew I had to find a way to stop this, to break free from whatever hold they had on me, but I didn't know how. All I knew was that I couldn't go on like this. I had to find the truth, no matter what it cost me. The following days were unbearable. The whispers had taken on a new, more sinister tone. It wasn't just a background noise anymore. It was a constant, invasive presence, creeping into my thoughts, turning my mind into a battlefield. They were telling me things, dark things, secrets about the universe and my place in it. It was maddening. I stopped going to work. I stopped seeing friends. I barely ate. My house became my prison, and every night the whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. One night, as I sat in my living room, trying to drown out the whispers with loud music, I felt a sudden cold breeze. The room grew dark, and the lights flickered before going out completely. I was plunged into darkness, save for the dim glow of my computer screen. My heart pounded as I heard footsteps behind me. Slowly, I turned around. There, standing in the doorway, was the man in the suit. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. "You can't escape," he said, his voice sending chills down my spine. "You belong to us now." "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "To fulfill your destiny," he replied. "You were chosen for a reason. Embrace it." Before I could respond, he vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. The whispers intensified, filling my head with visions of horrors beyond comprehension. I saw flashes of the creatures, their twisted bodies writhing in agony. I saw myself, trapped in a cage, just like them. Desperate for answers, I turned to the dark web again, searching for anything that could help me understand what was happening. After hours of sifting through forums and obscure websites, I found a thread that seemed promising. It spoke of a secret organization that experimented on extraterrestrial life forms, using humans as caretakers and, sometimes, subjects. The more I read, the more it made sense. The job, the creatures, the man in the suit, they were all part of this organization, and I was their latest pawn. I found an address linked to the organization, a secluded facility outside of town. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to go. I had to find answers, to confront whoever was behind this nightmare. The next day, I drove to the address. The facility was hidden deep in the woods, surrounded by high fences and security cameras. It looked abandoned, but I knew better. I parked my car a distance away and made my way through the trees, trying to stay out of sight. I found a side entrance, the door slightly ajar. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The place was eerily silent, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and something else, something rotten. I crept through the hallways, my footsteps echoing off the cold concrete walls. As I ventured deeper into the facility, I found rooms filled with strange equipment, some of which I couldn't even begin to understand. Charts and diagrams covered the walls, depicting the creatures I'd seen, and others I couldn't have imagined. It was clear that these experiments had been going on for years, maybe decades. In the center of the facility, I found a large, heavily reinforced door. It looked like a vault, and it took all my strength to pry it open. Inside was a lab, dimly lit and filled with strange machines. At the far end of the room was a large glass container, and inside it was something that made my blood run cold. It was one of the creatures, but it was different, larger, more menacing. Its body was covered in scars and tubes, and its eyes, those empty, soulless eyes, stared directly at me. I realized with horror that this was what they were trying to create. A hybrid, a perfect blend of human and alien. "Welcome," a voice said behind me. I spun around to see the man in the suit, flanked by 2 armed guards. "You've come a long way." "What is this place?" I demanded. "What have you done?" "This is the future," he replied calmly. "A new era of evolution. and you are part of it. Why me? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Because you were chosen, he said. Your mind, your body, are perfect for the next phase. You've already begun to change, haven't you? I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. The whispers, the visions, the feeling of being watched. It was all part of the transformation. They had done something to me, something irreversible. You can't fight it, he said, stepping closer. Embrace it, and you will be rewarded. Resist, and you will suffer. I felt a surge of anger and fear. I wasn't going to let them control me. I wasn't going to become one of their experiments. Summoning all my courage, I lunged at the man in the suit, knocking him to the ground. The guards moved to restrain me, but I fought back with everything I had. In the chaos, I managed to grab a metal rod and swung it at the glass container, shattering it. The creature inside let out a deafening roar, and in an instant, the lab was thrown into turmoil. The creature tore through the room, attacking anything in its path. I took the chance to escape, running through the corridors, the sounds of destruction echoing behind me. I burst out of the facility and into the woods, running until my legs gave out. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. I had escaped, but I knew it wasn't over. They would come for me. They would find me. I returned home, but I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and left, moving from place to place, trying to stay one step ahead of them. The whispers were still there, always reminding me of what I had seen, what I had become. I don't know how much longer I can keep running. I don't know what the future holds, but one thing is certain. I can never escape my destiny. I spent the next few months living like a fugitive. Every creak in the night, every unfamiliar face in the crowd sent my heart racing. The whispers had taken a more disturbing turn, speaking in languages I didn't understand, but felt deep in my bones. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced that any moment the man in the suit or one of those creatures would appear to drag me back into that nightmare. My paranoia and fear reached a peak one night in a dingy motel on the outskirts of a small town. I hadn't slept in days, and my nerves were frayed. As I lay on the stained mattress, trying to force my mind to silence, I heard a faint tapping at the window. I froze, my body stiff with terror. Slowly, I turned my head and saw a shadowy figure outside, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. I bolted upright, grabbing the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a rusty old lamp. As I approached the window, the figure disappeared. I opened the curtain, hard pounding, and saw nothing but the empty parking lot. Shaking, I backed away and collapsed on the bed, my mind racing with fear and exhaustion. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep running. I needed to find out what they had done to me and how to stop it. I remembered the vial of black liquid they had sent me and decided it was time to confront my demons head on. I retrieved the vial from the trash, where I had discarded it, and examined it closely. The liquid inside seemed to pulsate with a life of its own. I knew drinking it was a risk, but I had no other choice. I had to know what was happening to me. With trembling hands, I opened the vial and downed the contents in one gulp. The taste was vile, metallic, and bitter, but almost immediately I felt a change. My vision blurred, and I collapsed onto the floor as darkness consumed me. When I woke up, I was no longer in the motel room. I was in a cold, sterile chamber, strapped to a metal table. The man in the suit stood over me, a sinister smile on his face. "Welcome back," he said. I see you finally accepted your fate. I struggled against the restraints, but they held firm. What did you do to me? I demanded, my voice weak. We've merely accelerated the process, he replied. You are becoming something more than human, something extraordinary. I looked around the room and saw other tables, each occupied by a person strapped down and writhing in agony. Their bodies were twisted, contorted, as they transformed into something monstrous. I realized with horror that I was one of them, one of the chosen subjects in this grotesque experiment. The man in the suit turned to a panel of instruments and began adjusting dials. The transformation is almost complete, he said. Soon you will be free of your human limitations. Embrace it. I felt a sharp pain shoot through my body, and I screamed as the changes began. My skin felt like it was on fire, my bones breaking and reforming. I could hear the others around me, their cries of pain echoing in the chamber. The whispers in my head grew louder, more coherent, urging me to give in to the transformation. But I fought back. I couldn't let them win. Summoning every ounce of strength, I focused on the man in the suit. You won't get away with this, I spat, my voice filled with rage. He simply smiled. We already have. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to break free of the restraints and lunged at him. He staggered back, surprised by my sudden strength. I grabbed a scalpel from a nearby tray and slashed at him, the blade cutting deep into his arm. He screamed, clutching the wound, and I took the opportunity to run. I stumbled through the corridors of the facility, my body still racked with pain. The walls seemed to close in around me, the whispers in my head urging me to return. But I couldn't. I had to escape, to find a way out of this nightmare. I burst through a set of doors and found myself in a large room filled with cages. The creatures inside watched me with their glowing eyes, their expressions a mix of fear and recognition. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that they had all been human once, just like me. As I made my way through the room, one of the creatures reached out and grabbed my arm. I turned to see a familiar face, twisted and deformed, but still recognizable. It was one of my old co-workers, someone who had disappeared months ago. Help us, he rasped, his voice barely audible. I nodded, my heart breaking. I'll try, I promised. I found an emergency exit and pushed through it, stumbling into the night. The cool air hit my face, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the facility. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back, until I reached a nearby road. I collapsed on the side of the road, gasping for breath, my body still in agony from the transformation. A car pulled up, and the driver, a kind-looking elderly man, got out and rushed to my side. Are you okay? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Help me, I whispered. Please. He helped me into the car and drove me to the nearest hospital. As we sped through the night, I knew that I couldn't stay there long. The organization would come for me, and I had to keep moving. But for now, I had a moment of respite, a chance to gather my strength and plan my next move. The transformation was far from over, and the whispers still haunted my mind. But I was determined to fight back, to find a way to stop the organization and free the others trapped in that hellish facility. I didn't know if I would succeed, but I had to try. My humanity depended on it. I didn't stay in the hospital long. The whispers wouldn't let me. They pushed me to keep moving, to stay ahead of the organization. The elderly man who had helped me got me through the night, but I left before dawn, disappearing into the early morning fog. I needed to disappear, to find a way to end this once and for all. I spent the next few weeks laying low, moving from town to town, avoiding any place where I might be recognized. I did my best to research the organization, digging through obscure forums, cryptic websites, and old conspiracy theories. It was slow going, but bit by bit, I started to piece together their network. They had facilities all over the country, maybe even the world, and they were all connected by one thing: the man in the suit. He was their enforcer, their collector. He tracked down those who tried to escape and brought them back, or worse. I knew he would come for me eventually. I had to be ready. One night, while holed up in a rundown motel, I finally found something useful. It was an old forum post, barely legible, but it mentioned a scientist who had once worked for the organization. He had left under mysterious circumstances and was rumored to have a way to reverse the transformations. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I tracked him down to a remote cabin in the mountains. It was a long and treacherous journey, but I made it. The cabin was old and weathered, hidden among the trees. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked on the door, and after a few tense moments, it creaked open. An elderly man with wild, unkempt hair and tired eyes peered out at me. "I know who you are," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "You're one of them, aren't you?" I nodded. "Please, I need your help." He stepped aside, letting me in. The cabin was cluttered with books, papers, and strange devices. He led me to a small table and motioned for me to sit. "They did something to you," he said, examining me closely. "But you're not fully transformed yet. There's still time." "Can you reverse it?" I asked, desperation in my voice. He sighed. "It's not that simple. The process they use is highly advanced, beyond anything I've ever seen. But there is a way. It's risky, and it might not work, but it's the only chance you've got." He explained the procedure, a complex and dangerous process that involved using a prototype machine he had built. It was designed to break down the alien DNA and restore my humanity, but it would be incredibly painful, and there was a high chance it could kill me. "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. "I can't live like this." We prepared for the procedure, setting up the machine and securing me to the table. As he worked, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. They knew what I was about to do, and they didn't like it. The scientist activated the machine, and pain, unlike anything I'd ever felt, coursed through my body. It was as if every cell was being torn apart and put back together. I screamed, my vision blurring as the room spun around me. The whispers turned to screams, echoing in my mind, but I fought to stay conscious. The pain intensified, and I felt myself slipping away. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. I lay there gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. The scientist leaned over me, his eyes wide with astonishment. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You're human again." I couldn't believe it. The whispers were gone, the pain was gone. I felt free, but my relief was short-lived. The door burst open, and there he was, the man in the suit, flanked by armed guards. "Did you really think you could escape?" he sneered, his eyes cold and calculating. The scientist stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. "Leave him alone," he demanded. "He's free now." The man in the suit laughed. "You can't free him. He belongs to us." I knew I couldn't let them take me back. Summoning the last of my strength, I grabbed a nearby scalpel and lunged at the man in the suit. He was caught off guard, and I managed to slash his arm, just like before. But this time, I didn't stop. I fought with everything I had, determined to end this once and for all. The guards moved to restrain me, but the scientists intervened, using the prototype machine to create a blinding flash of light. It gave me the distraction I needed. I managed to overpower the man in the suit, driving the scalpel deep into his chest. He let out a gurgled scream and collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around him. The guards hesitated, unsure of what to do without their leader. I seized the opportunity to grab the scientist and run. We made it out of the cabin and into the woods, the sounds of pursuit close behind. We ran for what felt like hours, the adrenaline keeping us going. Eventually, we found a hiding place among the rocks, and we waited, holding our breath until the sounds of the guards faded into the distance. I looked at the scientist, gratitude and exhaustion washing over me. "Thank you," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded. "You're free now, but they'll never stop looking for you. You need to keep moving. Stay hidden." I knew he was right. I could never go back to my old life, but I was free, and that was all that mattered. I said goodbye to the scientist and started walking, determined to put as much distance between myself and the organization as possible. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer alone in my fight. I had hope, and that was enough. The whispers were gone. The pain was gone. And as I walked into the dawn, I knew I had finally escaped the nightmare. But deep down, I knew the man in the suit had been right about one thing. I could never truly escape my destiny. I could only keep running, keep fighting, and hope that one day I would find a way to end it for good. I found leaked documents on the dark web about the pyramids. I found out my whole life was a joke. Hey everyone, I've never posted anything like this before, but I need to get this off my chest. I don't know how much time I have left, so here it goes. About a month ago, I stumbled upon some documents on the dark web that completely shattered my perception of reality. I'm not talking about some conspiracy theory crap. I'm talking about cold, hard evidence that something beyond comprehension has been hidden from us for thousands of years. It all started when I was bored one night, aimlessly browsing the internet. You know, typical 2 a.m. internet rabbit hole stuff. I came across a forum discussing the dark web and how you could find anything there. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a peek. I've messed around with Tor before, so it wasn't that hard to find my way into the darker corners of the internet. After a few hours of browsing through random, mostly mundane stuff, I found a link that caught my eye. The truth about the pyramids, leaked government files. I clicked on it, expecting some poorly written conspiracy theory or ancient alien nonsense. What I found was much, much worse. The link led me to a download page for a collection of documents, photos, and videos. The files were massive, and it took my computer the better part of an hour to download everything. Once it was done, I opened the first document, labeled Pyramid Origins Top Secret. It was a scanned, typewritten document from the 1950s, complete with government letterhead and classification markings. As I read, my heart started pounding in my chest. The document detailed an excavation in Egypt in 1949 that uncovered a series of underground chambers beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza. These chambers were not natural formations or burial sites. They were laboratories, filled with advanced technology that shouldn't have existed thousands of years ago. The document mentioned devices that could manipulate time, machines that could alter the fabric of reality itself, and evidence of human experimentation. I thought it was a hoax at first, but then I opened the photos. They were grainy black and white images, but they clearly showed the inside of the chambers. There were bodies, human bodies, strapped to tables with strange metallic instruments protruding from their skulls and chests. The expressions on their faces were contorted in unimaginable pain, eyes wide open in terror. One photo showed a device that looked like a giant, intricate clock. The caption read, "Temporal Manipulation Apparatus." Another showed a figure in a lab coat standing next to a sarcophagus, which was glowing with an eerie blue light. The caption, "Dr. Heinrich Müller, lead researcher." The videos were even worse. They were silent, shaky footage of the experiments. One clip showed a man being put into a chamber, and within seconds, his body started aging rapidly. His hair turned white, skin wrinkled and sagged, and in less than a minute, he was a withered corpse. Another video showed a woman screaming and thrashing as a machine drilled into her skull. Her screams cut off abruptly as her body went limp, eyes staring blankly at the camera. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces, heard those screams. I decided to dig deeper, see if I could find more information. Over the next few weeks, I pieced together the horrifying truth. The pyramids were not tombs. They were ancient research facilities built by a highly advanced civilization that predates human history. This civilization, which the documents referred to as the Ancients, had discovered the secrets of time and reality manipulation. They used these pyramids to conduct their experiments, often on unwilling human subjects. One particularly disturbing document detailed an experiment where they attempted to merge a human's consciousness with another dimension. The result was catastrophic. The subject's body twisted and contorted, eyes melting into black voids, mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. The text described the sound he made as a gurgling, inhuman laugh mixed with screams of agony. As I read on, I found references to a hidden chamber deep beneath the pyramid that supposedly contained the ultimate secret of the Ancients. The documents hinted at something so powerful, so dangerous, that it had to be buried and forgotten. I had to know more. I contacted a few people in the archaeology community, hoping to find someone who could help me verify the authenticity of these documents. Most of them dismissed me as a crackpot, but one person, an old professor who wished to remain anonymous, agreed to meet with me. We met in a dingy, dimly lit cafe. The professor looked like he hadn't slept in days. He listened patiently as I recounted what I had found. When I finished, he leaned in and whispered, "I've seen those documents before. They're real." He told me that he had been part of a secret archaeological dig in Egypt in the early 90s. They had uncovered more evidence of the Ancients and their experiments. But before they could publish their findings, the government shut them down. His colleagues disappeared, and he barely escaped with his life. "The world isn't ready for the truth," he said, eyes darting nervously around the room. "The powers that be will do anything to keep this secret buried. Anything." I left the cafe with a sinking feeling in my stomach. If what he said was true, I was in serious danger. I had to be careful. I started noticing strange things. Unmarked vans parked outside my apartment, unfamiliar faces in the crowds, my phone acting weird. I felt like I was being watched, followed. One night, I came home to find my apartment ransacked. My computer was gone, and so were all the documents I had printed out. Panic set in. I knew I had to disappear, go off the grid. I packed a bag, grabbed what little cash I had, and fled. Now, I'm constantly on the move, never staying in one place for more than a few days. I'm writing this from a cheap motel room, praying that I'll have enough time to hit post before they find me. If you're reading this, know that the pyramids are not what they seem. They're hiding something ancient, something powerful, and something unbelievably dangerous. And they will stop at nothing to keep it that way. After running for what felt like an eternity, I found myself holed up in a dingy motel room on the outskirts of a small town. My heart was constantly racing, and every creak or shadow outside my window sent a jolt of fear through me. It was in this state of paranoia that I received a message from an anonymous email address. The subject line read, "I know what you found. We need to talk." I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. The email contained an address and a time, a rundown diner at 3 a.m. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. When I arrived, the diner was nearly empty, save for a middle-aged man sitting in a corner booth. His eyes darted nervously as I approached. "Are you—" I started, but he cut me off. "Keep your voice down. They're everywhere." He gestured for me to sit. "I'm not going to waste time. What you found is only the tip of the iceberg. I used to work for a secret division of the government, tasked with covering up exactly what you've uncovered." He introduced himself as Daniel, though I doubted that was his real name. He explained that the documents I found were genuine, and that the experiments on humans were just the beginning. The hidden chamber beneath the pyramid was a vault for something much more sinister. In 1949, they found an artifact, he said, leaning in closer. A black, obsidian-like cube that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. They called it the Heart of the Ancients. It's a sentient device that can manipulate reality and time, but it feeds on human suffering. He paused, scanning the room before continuing. They tried to control it, to use its power, but it was too strong. The experiments you saw in those photos, they were attempts to harness its energy. Each failure resulted in unimaginable agony for the subjects. Their souls were consumed by the artifact, twisted into abominations. Daniel pulled out a flash drive. This contains video footage from the early 90s when they tried to open the chamber. I shouldn't be showing you this, but the world needs to know. Back in my motel room, I plugged in the flash drive, hands shaking. The video opened with a group of scientists in hazmat suits, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. They were gathered around a large stone door covered in hieroglyphs. With a low, grinding noise, the door slowly opened, revealing a dark, foreboding tunnel. The camera followed the team as they descended into the depths of the pyramid. The air seemed to grow heavier the deeper they went, and a low hum became audible, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the bones. Finally, they reached a massive chamber, at the center of which stood the artifact, a black cube pulsating with a sickly, unnatural glow. As they approached, the camera began to glitch, static and distortion filling the screen. The team attempted to set up equipment around the cube, but things quickly went wrong. One scientist, a woman, screamed and clutched her head. Blood began to pour from her eyes and ears. and she collapsed, convulsing violently. Another team member rushed to help her, but he too began to scream, his skin bubbling and blistering as if exposed to intense heat. The camera caught glimpses of shadowy figures moving at the edges of the light, twisted humanoid shapes that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. The last clear image was of the cube itself, now glowing brightly, and a monstrous face emerging from its surface. Its eyes were hollow voids, and its mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin. The screen went black, the hum now replaced by a chorus of agonized screams. I sat back, horrified and unable to process what I had just seen. Daniel's warning echoed in my mind. The heart of the ancients is not just a relic, it's a sentient being, and it's awake. The following days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I knew too much, and the government, or whoever was behind this, would stop at nothing to silence me. I decided to go dark, destroying my phone and abandoning my car. I moved on foot, using cash only, constantly looking over my shoulder, in a desperate bid to uncover more about the heart of the ancients. I reached out to an underground network of researchers and conspiracy theorists. After weeks of encrypted messages and secret meetings, I was directed to a man named Dr. Jameson, a former government scientist who had escaped the program. Meeting Dr. Jameson was like stepping into a nightmare. He lived in a dilapidated cabin in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by stacks of old papers and crude drawings of the artifact. His eyes were wild, and his voice trembled as he spoke. "They think they can control it," he whispered. "But it's not just an artifact. It's alive. It's hungry. It's been feeding on the souls of those poor bastards they sent down there. It's growing stronger." He showed me his notes, filled with ramblings about dimensional rifts, soul consumption, and something he called the coming. According to Jameson, the heart of the ancients was a beacon, calling out to its creators, summoning them back to our world. "They're coming to reclaim it," he said, eyes wide with terror. "And when they do, our reality will be twisted beyond recognition." I left Jameson's cabin with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. The heart of the ancients was not just a piece of ancient technology. It was a harbinger of something far worse. And if what Jameson said was true, humanity was on the brink of an unimaginable catastrophe. Every night since then, my dreams have been plagued by visions of that monstrous face and the agonized screams of its victims. I can feel its presence, a dark, oppressive force lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment to strike. I'm writing this now from yet another anonymous location, knowing that my time is running out. They're closing in on me, and I fear that I won't live to see the end of this. But the truth needs to be known. The pyramids are not just monuments to a bygone era. They are prisons, and the heart of the ancients is a prisoner longing for release. If it succeeds, our world will be consumed by a darkness beyond anything we can imagine. After my encounter with Dr. Jameson, I knew I had to take drastic measures. I couldn't just keep running. If the heart of the ancients was truly a beacon for something even worse, then I had to find a way to stop it. Jameson had given me a rough idea of where the entrance to the hidden chamber might be, but I needed more concrete information. I decided to head to Egypt, straight to the source. With a fake passport and what little money I had left, I boarded a plane and made my way to Cairo. From there, I traveled to Giza under the guise of a tourist. The streets were bustling with people, but I felt a growing sense of dread as I neared the pyramids. Using the map Jameson had crudely drawn for me, I navigated my way to a lesser-known entrance on the western side of the Great Pyramid. It was heavily guarded, but a hefty bribe and some fabricated credentials got me through. Inside, I was met with a labyrinth of tunnels and passages, most of which were not on any official maps. I wandered for hours, guided only by the faint hum I had come to associate with the artifact. The deeper I went, the colder and darker it became. My flashlight flickered, as if it was being affected by some unseen force. Finally, I found it, the stone door covered in hieroglyphs that Jameson had described. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The air was thick and musty, carrying an almost metallic scent that made my skin crawl. The tunnel beyond was pitch black, the hum growing louder with each step I took. After what felt like an eternity, I emerged into the massive chamber from the videos. There it was, in the center of the room, the heart of the ancients. The black cube pulsated with an eerie, otherworldly glow. As I approached, I could feel its malevolent presence, like a weight pressing down on my soul. My head began to ache, and whispers filled my ears, unintelligible, but deeply unsettling. I knew I had to document everything, so I set up a small camera on a tripod and hit record. As I stepped closer to the artifact, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I struggled to breathe. I reached out and touched the surface of the cube, and everything went dark. When I regained consciousness, I was no longer in the chamber. I was standing in a vast, desolate landscape, under a sky that churned with unnatural colors. The ground was littered with bones, and in the distance, I could see towering structures that looked like the pyramids, but twisted and distorted. I wasn't alone. Figures moved in the shadows, their forms shifting and flickering like the images from the video. They were humanoid, but grotesquely malformed, their eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. One of them stepped forward, its mouth stretching into a horrifying grin. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed, its voice a distorted echo. "You've seen too much." Panic set in, and I turned to run, but the ground beneath me began to crumble. I fell into darkness, the whispers now a cacophony of screams. When I hit the ground, I was back in the chamber, gasping for air. The camera was still recording, capturing my every move. Shaking, I grabbed the camera and fled the chamber, not daring to look back. I made my way through the tunnels, my mind racing with what I had seen. It wasn't just a beacon, it was a doorway, a bridge to another realm filled with unspeakable horrors. I emerged into the blinding sunlight, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. I knew I couldn't go to the authorities. They would either lock me up, or worse, make sure I disappeared. I needed to get this footage out to warn the world. Back at my motel, I reviewed the footage. The video showed the entire encounter, me touching the cube, collapsing, and then lying on the ground for several minutes before scrambling to my feet and fleeing. There were no signs of the otherworldly landscape or the twisted figures. It was as if it had all been in my head, but I knew better. I uploaded the footage to multiple online platforms, hoping at least one would gain traction before it was taken down. Within hours, the video was being shared widely, sparking heated debates and intense scrutiny. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me. As the sun set, I packed my things and prepared to move again. Just as I was about to leave, there was a knock at the door. My heart sank. I peeked through the peephole to see a group of men in black suits and sunglasses, their expressions grim. I grabbed my bag and bolted out the window, running as fast as I could. I could hear them shouting, footsteps pounding behind me. I ducked into an alley, heart pounding, and hid behind a dumpster. The men ran past, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. I had exposed the truth, but it had come at a great cost. Now, I was a hunted man, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The heart of the ancients had seen to that. Its influence was spreading, and I feared what would happen next. That night, I found an abandoned building and hunkered down. Sleep was impossible. Every sound made me jump, and the whispers from the artifact still echoed in my mind. I realized then that I had become part of something much larger, a battle between humanity and an ancient evil that could not be easily defeated. As I write this, I know they're closing in on me. My time is running out, but the world needs to know the truth. The pyramids are not what they seem. The heart of the ancients is awake, and it's calling out to something far worse than we can imagine. I spent the next few days constantly on the move, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. The feeling of being watched was relentless, a gnawing presence at the back of my mind. I knew that running wasn't a long-term solution. The only way to end this nightmare was to destroy the heart of the ancients. Desperation drove me to contact Daniel again. He was hesitant, but agreed to meet in an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of another nameless town. When I arrived, the place was dark and filled with the stench of decay. Daniel was already there, looking even more haggard than before. "I found a way," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We have to destroy it." Daniel's eyes widened. "You're insane. You can't just destroy it. That thing is beyond our understanding." "I don't have a choice. It's calling out to something. If we don't stop it, we're all doomed." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "There's a theory. Some believe that the artifact can be neutralized, but it requires a sacrifice, a powerful, deliberate act of will against it." I nodded. "I'll do it. Just tell me how." Daniel explained that the only way to neutralize the heart of the ancients was to bring it to the surface and perform a ritual that involved a specific set of ancient incantations. It would be dangerous, and there was no guarantee of success, but it was the only shot we had. The next few days were a blur of planning and preparation. We gathered the necessary supplies, ancient texts, ritualistic items, and equipment to transport the artifact. We knew we had to move quickly and quietly. The longer we stayed in one place, the greater the risk of being found. On the night of the ritual, we made our way back to the pyramid. The desert air was cool, and the full moon cast an eerie glow over the ancient stones. We managed to slip past the guards, making our way through the labyrinthine tunnels until we reached the chamber. The heart of the ancients pulsed with its usual malevolent light, casting long, dark shadows on the walls. As we approached, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. I could feel its power, a tangible force pressing down on me. We set up the ritual circle around the artifact, placing candles and symbols in precise patterns. Daniel began chanting the ancient incantations, his voice trembling but determined. I stood at the center of the circle, directly in front of the cube, and joined in. As we chanted, the air grew thick and heavy. The whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The ground beneath us began to tremble, and the walls of the chamber seemed to pulse in time with the artifact. Suddenly, a deafening roar filled the chamber, and the artifact's glow intensified, casting blinding light. I could see shadowy figures writhing and contorting within the light, their faces twisted in agony. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath in the air. The ritual was taking its toll. Daniel collapsed, clutching his head, blood pouring from his nose and ears. I felt a searing pain in my chest, as if my very soul was being torn apart, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. With a final, desperate cry, I reached out and placed my hands on the artifact. The moment I made contact, a jolt of electricity shot through me, and everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the floor of the chamber, the artifact dark and silent. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie silence. Daniel was lying next to me, unconscious but alive. I could feel the oppressive presence had lifted, but something was wrong. As I helped Daniel to his feet, we noticed that the chamber had changed. The walls were covered in strange pulsating veins, and the air was thick with a metallic taste. It was as if the pyramid itself had come alive, reacting to our actions. We made our way back through the tunnels, the walls seeming to close in around us. The once familiar passages were now twisted and distorted, filled with grotesque, organic shapes that oozed a dark, viscous fluid. We had unleashed something, a transformation that couldn't be undone, emerging into the desert night. We were met with a horrifying sight. The sky was a swirling mass of dark clouds, crackling with unnatural lightning. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and in the distance, we could see the pyramids themselves, shifting and warping. We had stopped the artifact, but in doing so, we had triggered something even worse. The heart of the ancients was no longer a passive relic. It had become a beacon, altering reality around it, creating a rift between our world and whatever horrors lay beyond. As we stood there, staring at the twisted landscape, I realized that our actions had only begun a new nightmare. The world as we knew it was changing, and there was no going back. The heart of the ancients was not just a relic of a forgotten civilization. It was a harbinger of a new era, an era of darkness and despair. We had only delayed the inevitable. The true horror was yet to come. The twisted landscape around us was a harbinger of the chaos we had unleashed. The pyramids, once silent sentinels of history, now loomed like monstrous living entities against the roiling sky. Daniel and I knew we couldn't just stand there and watch the world crumble. We had to find a way to close the rift we had created, even if it meant sacrificing ourselves. We retreated to a hidden safe house, an old tomb Daniel knew about, which was far enough from the pyramid's epicenter to give us some time to think. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty scent of ancient death. We lit a few lanterns and pored over the remaining ancient texts, desperately searching for any clue that could help us undo what we had done. Hours turned into days as we combed through the manuscripts, surviving on minimal food and water. Sleep was a luxury we could no longer afford. Daniel, despite his deteriorating health, pushed on, driven by sheer will. The text spoke of a counter-ritual, a way to seal the rift, but it required an unimaginable sacrifice, an offering of pure, untainted life to appease the ancients. "We need an innocent," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "Someone who hasn't been touched by the darkness of the artifact." It hit me like a punch to the gut. Innocents were rare in our world, especially in this hellscape. but there was no other option. We had to find someone, anyone, who could be our last hope. We ventured into the nearest town, which was now a chaotic mess of twisted buildings and terrified people. The air was filled with cries of despair, and the once bustling streets were now empty, save for the occasional distorted figure moving in the shadows. Amidst the chaos, we found a small group of survivors huddled in the remnants of a church. There we found her, a young girl, no older than 12, her wide eyes filled with fear, but untouched by the darkness that had consumed the rest of us. Her name was Amira. She had been hiding in the church with her parents, who were nowhere to be found. It felt wrong, horribly wrong, to consider what needed to be done, but the alternative was worse. I explained the situation to Amira as gently as I could, my heart breaking with every word. She was scared, but nodded bravely. "If it will save everyone, I'll do it," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. With Amira's consent, we made our way back to the pyramid. The journey was fraught with danger. The ground beneath us seemed to pulse, and shadowy figures lurked at every turn. The closer we got, the more oppressive the air became, like the very atmosphere was conspiring against us. We reached the chamber where the heart of the ancients lay dormant. The veins on the walls throbbed with a sickly light, casting eerie shadows that danced and flickered. We set up the ritual circle again, this time with Amira at the center. Daniel and I began the counter-ritual, our voices blending in a desperate chant. As we chanted, the artifact began to glow once more, its light intensifying until it was almost blinding. Amira stood still, tears streaming down her face, but her expression determined. The ground shook violently, and the screams of countless souls echoed through the chamber. The moment Amira's small, trembling hand touched the artifact, a blinding flash of light filled the room, and a powerful shockwave knocked us off our feet. The screams reached a crescendo and then abruptly ceased. Silence fell, heavy and complete. When I regained my senses, the artifact was gone, reduced to a pile of dark, shimmering dust. Amira lay on the ground, unmoving. I rushed to her side, but it was too late. Her sacrifice had been accepted. She had given her life to seal the rift and save our world. Daniel and I carried Amira's lifeless body out of the pyramid, our hearts heavy with grief and guilt. The sky was clearing, the twisted landscape slowly returning to its natural state. We had succeeded, but at a cost that would haunt us forever. We buried Amira in a quiet spot overlooking the pyramids, marking her grave with a simple stone. "A hero," it read. She had given everything to save a world that had no idea of the horrors that had almost befallen it. As I stood there, I realized that the battle wasn't over. The artifact was gone, but the knowledge of its existence, the dark truths it had revealed, remained. Daniel and I vowed to continue our fight, to protect the world from the hidden dangers that lurked in the shadows of history. We knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, but we couldn't turn back. The pyramids, the ancients, and their terrifying legacy were now a part of us, a burden we had to bear. And as long as we lived, we would ensure that the horrors we had witnessed would never rise again. I ordered a chief from the dark web. He made the most delicious meal I've ever tasted. All right, so I never thought I'd end up writing something like this. Hell, I never thought I'd even experience something this insane. But here I am, typing it all out, because I need to get it off my chest. I'm not even sure where to start, but I guess the beginning is as good a place as any. It all started a few months ago. I'm a big fan of trying new things, especially when it comes to food. I've always been a bit of a foodie, always on the lookout for unique dining experiences. So one night, after a few beers and a lot of boredom, I found myself diving deep into the darker corners of the internet. The dark web has always been a curiosity for me. I mean, who hasn't heard the stories, right? Drugs, weapons, hitmen, all the usual crap. But then I stumbled upon something different. Something that immediately caught my eye. A service offering private chefs. Now these weren't just any chefs. The website boasted that these were chefs with a twist. They promised the most unique, unforgettable dining experience you could imagine. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. It sounds sketchy as hell. But like I said, I was bored and I had a few beers in me. So I decided to go for it. What could go wrong, right? The process was simple. You fill out a form, select your preferences, and then wait. The site was very clear that once you placed an order, there was no going back, no cancellations, no refunds. I didn't think much of it at the time. It all just seemed like part of the gimmick. I paid in Bitcoin, filled out my address, and hit submit. Within minutes, I got a confirmation email. It said my chef would arrive the following evening. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I mean, I was excited, but there was also this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. What if it was a scam? What if some weirdo showed up at my door? But I brushed it off. After all, what's life without a little risk? Evening rolled around and I started to get nervous. I made sure everything was clean and ready, just in case. Around 8 p.m., there was a knock at my door. My heart was pounding as I opened it. Standing there was a man, dressed in a crisp white chef's uniform. He looked completely normal, maybe in his late 40s, with a friendly smile. "Good evening," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Chef Lucien. Shall we get started?" I invited him in, trying to play it cool. He brought in a large black case and set it down on the kitchen counter. We made small talk for a bit, and he asked about my preferences and any dietary restrictions. He was professional, polite, and seemed to know his stuff. I started to relax a bit. He began unpacking his case, laying out various knives, spices, and other ingredients. I watched as he moved around my kitchen with ease, preparing what I assumed would be an amazing meal. The smells that began to fill the room were incredible. Rich, savory aromas that made my mouth water. Then things started to get weird. He asked if I had any special requests. I laughed it off, thinking it was some kind of joke, but he was dead serious. He said he could prepare anything I wanted, absolutely anything. There was something in his eyes, a glint of something that made me uneasy. I shrugged and told him to surprise me. Big mistake. He nodded and got to work. I watched as he took out a strange-looking meat from his case. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Dark, almost black, with a texture that made my skin crawl. But the smells, God, the smells were intoxicating. He worked quickly, slicing, dicing, and sautéing with precision. The kitchen was soon filled with the sound of sizzling and the rich, mouth-watering aroma of something truly incredible. As he cooked, he started to talk. At first, it was just about food, his favorite dishes, his travels, that sort of thing. But then he started to get personal. He told me about his past, about how he used to work in some of the finest restaurants in the world, how he had grown tired of the mundane, everyday cuisine, how he had developed a taste for something different. The more he talked, the more uneasy I felt. There was something off about him. His eyes, his smile, it all seemed too perfect, too calculated. But I couldn't deny the allure of the meal he was preparing. My stomach was growling, and my mouth was watering. Finally, he finished. He plated the dish with an artist's touch, arranging the food with care. When he placed it in front of me, I was speechless. It was beautiful. A work of art. I couldn't wait to dig in. I took the first bite, and my world changed. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. The flavors exploded in my mouth, each bite better than the last. I couldn't get enough. I ate and ate, savoring every mouthful. It was like a drug, an addiction. I couldn't stop. Then as I finished the last bite, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. My vision blurred, and I felt my heart race. I looked up at Chef Lucien, and he was smiling. That same perfect, calculated smile. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt heavy. My limbs were numb. Panic set in as I realized something was very, very wrong. He leaned in closer, his smile never wavering. "Don't worry," he whispered. "The first taste is always the most intense. You'll get used to it." I blacked out. When I woke up, I was lying on my kitchen floor. The room was dark, and the only light came from the moon shining through the window. My head was pounding, and my stomach felt like it was on fire. I struggled to my feet, trying to make sense of what had happened. Chef Lucien was gone. His case, his utensils, everything was gone. The only evidence that he had been there was the lingering smell of that incredible meal. I stumbled to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like hell, pale, sweaty, with dark circles under my eyes. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just a weird dream or some kind of food poisoning. But deep down, I knew it was something more, something darker, something I couldn't explain. And that was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a splitting headache. The events of the previous night felt like a bad dream, but the soreness in my body told me it was all too real. I dragged myself to the kitchen, half expecting to see some sign of Chef Lucien, but there was nothing. The kitchen was spotless, like he'd never even been there. I tried to go about my day, but something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My stomach churned, and I felt a constant, gnawing hunger. No matter what I ate, nothing satisfied me. It was like a bottomless pit. I tried everything in my pantry, but the taste was bland, lifeless. By afternoon, I was desperate. I decided to go out and get something, anything that might take away this awful hunger. I went to my favorite burger joint, ordered the biggest, juiciest burger they had, and practically inhaled it. But it didn't help. If anything, it made the hunger worse. I started to feel nauseous, the greasy food sitting like a rock in my stomach. Back at home, I tried to distract myself with TV, video games, anything to take my mind off the gnawing emptiness inside me, but nothing worked. My thoughts kept drifting back to that meal. The taste, the texture. It was like my body was craving it, demanding it. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. I kept replaying the events in my head, wondering what the hell had happened. Who was Chef Lucien? What had he fed me? And why was I feeling like this? Questions swirled in my mind, but there were no answers. Around 3 a.m., I heard a noise downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. There it was again, a soft rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The kitchen was dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from the countertop. As I got closer, I realized it was my laptop, which I'd left there the night before. The screen was on, displaying a new email notification. My blood ran cold when I saw who it was from, Chef Lucien. With trembling hands, I opened the email. It was short and to the point. Enjoyed our dinner? There's more where that came from. Same time tomorrow. Be ready. My stomach twisted in knots. What the hell was going on? I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend none of this was happening. But another part of me, the part that was consumed by that insatiable hunger, wanted more, needed more. The next day was a blur. I went through the motions, barely able to focus on anything. My hunger had grown worse, a constant gnawing pain that wouldn't let up. By evening, I was a wreck. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I couldn't go on like this. At exactly 8 p.m., there was a knock at the door. My heart was in my throat as I opened it. There he was, Chef Lucien, with that same friendly smile. "Good evening," he said. "Shall we begin?" This time, there was no small talk. He went straight to work, moving around my kitchen with practiced ease. The smells that filled the room were even more intoxicating than before. My mouth watered, and I could feel my stomach growling in anticipation. As he cooked, I couldn't help but watch. There was something almost hypnotic about the way he moved, the way he handled the ingredients. I noticed he was using the same strange meat from the night before, but I didn't care. All I could think about was how much I wanted it. Finally, he placed the dish in front of me. It looked even more exquisite than the last one. My hand shook as I picked up the fork. The first bite was like an explosion of flavor. It was everything I'd been craving, and more. I devoured it, not caring about anything else. As I ate, Chef Lucien watched, a satisfied smile on his face. When I finished, he leaned in, his eyes gleaming. "You see," he said softly, "the hunger will never go away, not until you embrace it." I tried to ask what he meant, but my tongue felt heavy, my mind foggy. The dizziness hit me again, and I felt myself slipping into darkness. His voice followed me down, a whisper in the void. "Tomorrow, you'll understand. Tomorrow, you'll know the truth." When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying on the kitchen floor again, my body aching. The hunger was still there, worse than ever. I staggered to my feet, my mind racing. I didn't know what was happening to me, but I knew one thing for sure. I needed more. The next day was torture. My mind was consumed by the events of the past 2 nights. The gnawing hunger was now a constant, unbearable ache. I couldn't concentrate on work, couldn't focus on anything other than that insatiable craving. It was like a parasite, eating away at me from the inside. I tried to call out sick, but my boss insisted I come in. Said they were short-staffed and needed all hands on deck. So I dragged myself to the office, barely able to function. My co-workers noticed something was off. I got a lot of concerned looks, a few awkward questions, but I just brushed them off. What could I say? That I'd ordered a chef from the dark web, and now I was addicted to his mysterious meals. The hours crawled by. Every minute felt like an eternity. My stomach was a constant knot of pain and longing. I couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the taste of that incredible food. It was like nothing else mattered. Finally, the workday ended. I practically ran to my car, desperate to get home. As I drove, my mind was racing. What did Chef Lucien mean by embrace the hunger? What truth was he talking about? None of it made sense, but I couldn't deny the pull, the need to see him again. When I got home, there was a package waiting for me on the doorstep. No return address, just my name written in elegant script. I brought it inside, hands shaking as I tore it open. Inside was a small black notebook and a simple note. Read, understand, prepare. The notebook was filled with recipes, but not like any recipes I had ever seen. They were written in a language I couldn't understand, filled with strange symbols and diagrams. My head started to spin as I flipped through the pages. The images were disturbing, grotesque. Pictures of ingredients that looked almost human, twisted and deformed. I felt sick to my stomach, but couldn't tear my eyes away. Each page seemed to draw me in deeper, the hunger growing more intense with every word, every image. I could feel myself slipping, my grip on reality loosening. As the clock neared 8 p.m., I heard the now familiar knock at the door. I was sweating, my heart pounding as I opened it. There stood Chef Lucien, his smile even more unsettling than before. "Good evening," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I see you received my gift." I nodded, too afraid to speak. He glanced at the notebook on the table, then back at me. "Did you read it?" he asked, his voice smooth and calm. I don't understand it," I stammered. He chuckled softly. "You will. In time. Tonight we take the next step." He moved to the kitchen, setting up with the same precision as before. But this time, there was an edge to his movements, a sense of urgency. I watched, mesmerized, as he began to prepare the meal. The ingredients were stranger this time, dark, slimy substances that oozed and writhed. The smells were intoxicating, a heady mix of spices and something else, something primal. As he cooked, he began to talk, not the friendly small talk from the first night, but something darker, more sinister. He spoke of ancient rituals, forbidden knowledge, and the true nature of hunger. He told me that the meals he prepared were more than just food. They were a gateway, a connection to something beyond our understanding. "The hunger you feel," he said, his eyes locked onto mine, "is the call of the void. It is the essence of existence, the purest form of desire. To embrace it is to transcend the limitations of the flesh, to become one with the darkness." I didn't understand, but I couldn't look away. His words seemed to seep into my mind, planting seeds of doubt and curiosity. The hunger was all-consuming now, a burning ache that threatened to swallow me whole. Finally, he finished. The dish he placed before me was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It glistened in the dim light, a twisted, pulsating mass that seemed almost alive. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of decay and spice that made my mouth water and my stomach churn. "Eat," he commanded, his voice low and hypnotic. "Embrace the hunger." I didn't hesitate. I dug in, shoveling the food into my mouth with a desperation I couldn't control. The taste was indescribable, a mix of ecstasy and agony. Each bite sent waves of pleasure and pain through my body, the hunger growing with every mouthful. As I ate, I felt a strange sensation spreading through me. My vision blurred, and my body felt heavy. The room seemed to warp and twist, the walls closing in around me. I could hear Chef Lucien's voice, a distant echo in the darkness. "You are becoming," he whispered. "You are transcending." The last thing I remember was his smile, that perfect, calculated smile as the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat. My body ached, my mind a foggy mess. The hunger was still there, gnawing at my insides, but now there was something else, a sense of anticipation. I felt different, changed in some fundamental way. I didn't know what was happening to me, but one thing was clear. There was no going back. Waking up the next morning, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. My body ached, every muscle sore and tense. The hunger was still there, but now it felt more like a presence, something living inside me, gnawing away at my sanity. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to shake the feeling. I looked at myself in the mirror, and what I saw made my blood run cold. My eyes were different, darker, with a strange, almost predatory gleam. My skin was paler, almost translucent. I looked like I hadn't slept in days, which wasn't far from the truth. The person staring back at me was a distorted version of myself, someone twisted and broken. I tried to ignore it, to go about my day like everything was normal, but it wasn't. Nothing was normal anymore. The hunger was always there, a constant gnawing pain. I couldn't eat anything else. Regular food tasted like ash in my mouth. I was trapped in this nightmare, and there was no way out. As the day went on, I started noticing things, little changes. My senses were sharper. I could hear conversations from across the room, smell things I'd never noticed before. My mind was racing, thoughts coming in rapid, disjointed bursts. It was like I was becoming something else, something more. By the time evening rolled around, I was a wreck. The anticipation was unbearable. I needed to see Chef Lucien again, needed to understand what was happening to me. At exactly 8 p.m., the knock came. My heart was pounding as I opened the door. There he was, standing on my doorstep with that same unsettling smile. But this time, there was something different in his eyes, a hint of satisfaction. "Good evening," he said smoothly. "Shall we continue?" I didn't even answer. I just stepped aside and let him in. He moved with the same practiced ease, setting up in the kitchen like he owned the place. As he worked, he glanced at me, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "You're changing," he said softly, embracing the hunger. "It's a beautiful thing." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was watch as he prepared the meal. This time, the ingredients were even more bizarre, strange twisted things that seemed to pulse and writhe on the counter. The smells were intoxicating, a heady mix of spices and something darker, more primal. As he cooked, he began to talk. His voice was calm, almost soothing, as he explained the nature of the hunger. He told me about the ancient rituals, the forbidden knowledge passed down through generations, how the hunger was a gateway, a path to something greater. "The void is calling you," he said, his eyes locked onto mine. "To embrace it is to transcend the limitations of the flesh, to become one with the darkness." I didn't understand, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. His words seemed to seep into my mind, filling me with a strange sense of purpose. The hunger was more than just a physical need. It was a calling, a destiny. "Finally," he finished. The dish he placed before me was a twisted masterpiece, a pulsating mass of flesh and bone that seemed almost alive. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of decay and spice that made my mouth water and my stomach churn. "Eat," he commanded, his voice low and hypnotic. "Embrace the hunger." I didn't hesitate. I dug in, the taste exploding in my mouth, a mix of ecstasy and agony. Each bite sent waves of pleasure and pain through my body, the hunger growing with every mouthful. As I ate, I felt the changes spreading through me, my vision blurring, my body feeling heavy. The room seemed to warp and twist, the walls closing in around me. I could hear Chef Lucien's voice, a distant echo in the darkness. "You are becoming," he whispered. "You are transcending." The last thing I remember was his smile, that perfect, calculated smile, as the darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was lying on the kitchen floor. My body was drenched in sweat, my mind a foggy mess. The hunger was still there, but now it felt different, more intense, more demanding. I staggered to my feet, my reflection in the window catching my eye. I was changing. My skin was paler, my eyes darker. I looked like a ghost, a shadow of my former self. The person staring back at me was barely recognizable, twisted and broken. I didn't know what was happening to me, but one thing was clear. I was no longer in control. The hunger was consuming me, changing me into something else, something darker. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was losing myself, becoming a slave to the hunger, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The next morning, I woke up feeling like my body was no longer my own. Every muscle ached, every joint throbbed with pain. The hunger was relentless, gnawing at my insides, consuming my every thought. I could barely think straight. It felt like I was slipping further into a nightmare I couldn't escape. As the day dragged on, I knew I couldn't go on like this. The changes were becoming more pronounced. My skin was almost translucent, veins visible like dark, twisted roots. My eyes had a predatory gleam, pupils dilated and dark. Every noise, every smell was amplified, almost overwhelming my senses. I stayed home from work, unable to face the outside world. I paced around my apartment, my thoughts racing. I tried to eat, but everything tasted like ash. The only thing I craved was that damned meal, the one Chef Lucien had prepared. I was hooked, addicted to something I didn't understand. As evening approached, the anticipation became unbearable. I found myself counting down the minutes until 8 p.m. The clock seemed to move slower, each tick a reminder of the hell I was living in. When the knock finally came, I felt a twisted mix of relief and dread. I opened the door, and there he was, Chef Lucien, with that same unsettling smile. This time, though, there was a glint in his eyes, a hint of something dark and sinister. "Good evening," he said, stepping inside. "I see you're ready for the final step." I didn't reply. I just watched as he moved to the kitchen, setting up his tools with practiced ease. This time, there was no need for instructions. I knew what to expect, and I was ready to embrace whatever he had in store. As he cooked, he spoke in low, soothing tones. He explained that the final meal would complete my transformation, that I would become something more than human, something greater. "The void is calling you," he said, his eyes gleaming. "To embrace it fully is to transcend your mortal limitations. Tonight, you will become one with the darkness." I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. His words seemed to seep into my mind, filling me with a strange sense of purpose. The hunger was all-consuming now, a burning ache that demanded to be satisfied. Finally, he placed the dish before me. It was a grotesque masterpiece, a pulsating mass of flesh and bone that seemed almost alive. The smell was intoxicating, a mix of decay and spice that made my mouth water and my stomach churn. "Eat," he commanded, his voice low and hypnotic. Embrace the hunger. Become one with the void. I didn't hesitate. I dug in, shoveling the food into my mouth with a desperation I couldn't control. The taste was an explosion of pleasure and pain, each bite sending waves of ecstasy and agony through my body. As I ate, I felt the changes spreading through me, my vision blurring, my body feeling heavy. The room began to warp and twist, the walls closing in around me. I could hear Chef Lucien's voice, a distant echo in the darkness. "You are becoming," he whispered. "You are transcending." I felt myself slipping, my consciousness fading. The last thing I saw was Chef Lucien's smile, that perfect, calculated smile, as the darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, it was dark. I was lying on the kitchen floor, my body drenched in sweat. But this time, something was different. The hunger was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. I felt complete, whole. I staggered to my feet, my reflection in the window catching my eye. I was different. My skin was pale, almost translucent, my eyes dark and predatory. I looked like a ghost, a shadow of my former self, but I felt stronger, more alive than I had in days. I walked to the kitchen, the lingering smell of the meal filling my senses. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a connection to something greater. I knew that I had embraced the hunger, become one with the void. As I stood there, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see Chef Lucien standing in the doorway with that same unsettling smile. "You've done well," he said softly. "You've embraced the hunger. Now, you are one of us." I didn't understand, but I knew that my life would never be the same. I had become something else, something greater, and there was no going back. Chef Lucien stepped forward, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Welcome to the void," he whispered, and with those words, I knew that my transformation was complete. I was no longer just a man. I was something more, something greater. I had embraced the hunger, become one with the darkness, and there was no escape.